Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight, the Safety Act is once again in limbo after a judge rules portions of it unconstitutional. What that means for eliminating cash bail.
Southwest, they just need to do better.
Southwest Airlines says it plans to return to normal operations by Friday after a week of cancellations and thousands stranded.
We sometimes have to pass laws to get people to do what we think is the right thing to do.
Hundreds of new laws will take effect in 2023. We have a handful that you should know.
Months before that bill lands in your mailbox, local governments, cities, counties, and school districts decide how much money they need.
Property tax bills for Cook County homeowners are due tomorrow. WTTW News explains how your bill is calculated. South and West Sides, we look back on memorable moments from our 2022 In Your Neighborhood series. What are the greatest films of all time? We talk about the latest edition of the revered Sight and Sound movie list with some local critics.
'Cause I'm not just an eye when I'm with you.
And Chicago children's musicians compete for the same Grammy Award. But first, some of today's top stories. The Safety Act is on hold for some Illinois counties due to a ruling from a Kankakee County judge. The judge ruled a portion of the act is unconstitutional and potentially puts the law on hold for 65 counties that have sued the state over it. The Kankakee State's attorney says in a statement the act, quote, amended the state constitution and, quote, eroded the constitutional protections of the Victims' Rights Act. However, Cook County leaders say cash bail will still go away here because this county was not a plaintiff in the lawsuit and the judge did not issue any kind of injunction on the law. We'll have much more on this complicated and contentious ruling in just a moment. After days of headaches, canceled flights, and canceled plans, Southwest Airlines says it expects to return to normal operations tomorrow. It's likely that far more than 1 million passengers have been impacted. Midway Airport, which is a hub for Southwest, still saw 34% of its flights canceled early this afternoon. However, the piles of luggage from cancellation that we saw earlier in the week have since been moved to a, quote, secure location. And we'll have a deeper dive into the Southwest story later on in the program as well. A Latino civil rights organization says it has reached a settlement with Illinois leaders and election officials over redistricting. The Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund challenged redrawn legislative maps because they claim lawmakers relied on population estimates rather than 2020 census data. Historical districts are drawn using data from the latest census. However, due to the pandemic, the population count and release of data was delayed. MALDEF says Illinois legislative defendants agreed to pay the plaintiffs $200,000 in attorney's fees. And up next, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul on the implications of the latest court ruling on the Safety Act. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, and the support of these donors.
The controversial new law to end cash bail statewide is now in limbo. This after a Kankakee County judge late last night ruled portions of the Safety Act unconstitutional just days before it was set to take effect. But the ruling appears to keep the law intact for some of the biggest counties in the state, namely Cook and Lake, that were not part of the lawsuit. So what happens now? Joining us is Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul, and we'll be joined by Jackson County State's Attorney Joseph Cervantes in a few minutes. Attorney General Raoul, thanks for being here. I want to read part of Judge Cunnington's ruling here, saying, quote, the administration of the justice system is an inherent power of the courts upon which the legislature may not infringe, and the setting of bail falls within the administrative power. The appropriateness of bail rests with the authority of the court and may not be determined by legislative fiat. This was his interpretation, declaring parts of the Safety Act unconstitutional. Your reaction?
Well, we disagree, and we'll wait for a final appealable order in order to appeal this to the Supreme Court. As we stated in our briefs, and on our arguments to the court that we don't think that this infringes on the inherent judicial power. In fact, the legislature is given power to regulate how judges, for instance, sentence. Their mandatory minimums and mandatory maximums, and so there are areas of overlapping authority, and pretrial detention is one of them. And in particular with the amendments to the Safety Act, I think that what the legislature has done is that, in fact, expanded the judicial discretion with regards to pretrial detention.
And I think there's a lot of confusion right now as to what this means for January 1st, because you've said that the judges declared this part of the law unconstitutional, but it can still go into effect in places like Cook County, Lake County that were not on this lawsuit. So how can a law be declared unconstitutional, but certain counties can still go ahead with it anyway?
Well, normally, in an order to restrain the implementation of a law, it would be done by injunction. And in this case, the plaintiffs did request for an injunction, and the judge denied it. So this judge's decision does not have precedential value, as you mentioned, in other counties. And quite frankly, it doesn't have any precedential value upon any judge. Any judge, including in Kankakee County and any one of the other counties, can make a decision if a defendant asks for the implementation of the provisions of the Safety Act in their case. That, each and every judge can make a decision de novo on that.
Is it odd that there is no injunction in this decision, meaning that despite the judge's interpretation, the law does not have to be put on pause while it goes through the court system and goes up to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that was an appropriate decision not to have an injunction. However, I disagree with the notion, the conclusion that of unconstitutionality, either based on separation of powers or the sureties clause within the Constitution. The sureties clause in particular does not mean necessarily cash bail.
And the state Supreme Court, you've said you're going to appeal it. It would seem to go in your favor because it's a 5-2 Democratic majority on the state Supreme Court. What's the timeline here for an appeal and a decision there?
Well, first of all, I don't think partisan affiliation impacts the state Supreme Court, to its credit, hasn't been making decisions largely in the vast majority of cases based on partisan basis. And so, to its credit, it has avoided doing so, and it's looked at the law and the merits and the history of precedent. And I think it will do so in this case and overturn this judge's decision with regards to constitutionality. With regards to timing, it's difficult to predict what the timing will be. We'll certainly, as soon as there's an appealable order, we will make that appeal and start the process.
All right, Attorney General.
Thank you.
And now we're joined by the state's attorney from downstate Jackson County. His name is Joseph Cervantes. State's Attorney Cervantes, thank you so much for joining us. And you were a party on this lawsuit. Clearly, the judge in Kankakee County agreed with you. So can you interpret for us why you believe, and he believes, the law is unconstitutional and how it tramples on the roles of the courts?
Well, thank you, Paris. I appreciate being here and being able to express my opinion. I think it's clear that the law was unconstitutional based on the Illinois State Constitution. But I want to make it clear that many of the state's attorneys, and I don't speak for the Illinois State's Attorney Association right now, which I am a part of, but a lot of it didn't have to do with whether we agreed with the issue or not. A lot of it was strictly on the foundation of whether this was constitutional. And I think where the Illinois Attorney General and several advocates of this law go wrong is that they don't understand the other side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is simple. while we have individuals being released without cash bail, that may be perfectly well and fine. But then we have individuals who are going to be in jail with no cash bond. And that is a serious issue, one that hasn't been talked about. But as we speak and work with community groups all across Southern Illinois, they start to realize for the first time forever, we have individuals in our jail that are shackled and unable to post bond. And that's something that's very disconcerting to me.
So this is a part of the law that you found problematic. But let me ask you this. There's no explicit injunction in this ruling. Does that mean come January 1st that judges can decide to do away with cash bail?
You know, I think that's exactly what it means. But I think the Illinois Supreme Court is going to rule on that very quickly. But there's no doubt we're going to see several different rulings over the next several days. Now, the parties that were involved in the lawsuit, no doubt, are not going to have to roll out or implement this part of the Safety Act unless somebody steps in between now and then. But it's the counties that this does not apply to, according to the ruling from Kankakee, that we're going to see a lot of rulings from. I anticipate several TROs or temporary restraining orders being filed over the next several days, simply having counties raise their hand and say, hey, what about me? And I expect that to start happening as early as tomorrow.
So a lot of confusion here, and now this is going to go to the state Supreme Court, as you heard the Attorney General say. What do you think the outcome is going to be there?
You know, if I could guess the outcome of what the Illinois Supreme Court's going to do, I wouldn't be working for a living. And so I'd like to reserve that particular opinion. I do know that the Illinois Constitution specifically gives the rights to Illinois citizens to be able to be innocent and claim their innocence until they're proven guilty. And it says specifically under Section 9 that they have the right to bail. And also, the one thing listening to the Illinois Attorney General is saying that he believes that this bill gives discretion to the judges. I believe that if you got judges off the record, they would absolutely disagree, because that's not the interpretation that Illinois state's attorneys have, and it's not the interpretation that I've heard from judges. And make no mistake about it, I'm not in Springfield. I'm here in a state's attorney's office in the courtroom trying cases. This is where the rubber hits the road. So from my experience and my point of view, this has been disastrous. And with only 3 days left, we should be a lot farther along than this.
A lot up in the air, and as you mentioned, maybe TROs filed in the next few days. So a lot of uncertainty right now, and our thanks to State's Attorney Joseph Cervantes from downstate Jackson County. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paris. I appreciate it.
Cook County homeowners have about 29 hours left if you want to avoid late charges. The second installment of Cook County property taxes are due by 11:59 tomorrow night. Did you ever wonder just how your property tax bill gets calculated? Our Heather Sharon takes you on a journey through that game, and it's part of our series, WTTW News Explains.
Property taxes can be a doozy, or rather, how they are calculated can be. Months before that bill lands in your mailbox, local governments, cities, counties, and school districts decide how much money they need. Then the folks in charge break out the calculators to figure out how to spread that amount across all of the properties in the area. That's your tax rate. But it isn't an even split. Your final bill or share is based on the value of your home. After all, the owner of a $100,000 house shouldn't be expected to pay the same as someone with a multi-million-dollar mansion, right? So the number crunchers hit the books. Value of each property using a whole bunch of data like sale price, lot size, neighborhood, home age, and more, all following a series of steps designed to protect taxpayers from wild swings in their bills. As a property owner, you can appeal your fair market value before it's set. Next up, assessment. In Cook County, residential properties are assessed at 10% of fair market value. If your home is valued at $300,000, the assessed value of your property is $30,000. To help make sure everyone pays their fair share, officials then apply a countywide equalizer to the value of each property. And property owners can get breaks or exemptions for a number of reasons, ranging from old age or military service to just living in their own home. Now it's time to finish up the math. Remember the tax rate from the beginning? Multiply it against that final value and voila, you have your annual property tax bill. And of course, that money goes towards critical community services like schools, healthcare, parks, and libraries. Ah, home sweet home.
See, it's that simple. And again, the second installment of your Cook County property taxes are due tomorrow night by 11:59. You can pay online on the Treasurer's website at any Chase Bank location, directly from a checking or savings account from more than 200 participating community banks, by mail with a postmark no later than December 30th, and in person at the Treasurer's office downtown. Don't be late. Southwest Airlines says it'll be back to almost normal operations tomorrow. That's cold comfort for the thousands of travelers who have been stranded over the past week, some still looking for their missing luggage. Southwest CEO Robert Jordan apologized to customers in a video statement.
We're doing everything we can to return to a normal operation. And please also hear that I'm truly sorry.
So what can those passengers do, and what does the future hold for the embattled airline? Joining us to talk about that are Teresa Murray, who directs Consumer Watchdog Office for the Public Interest Research Group, or PIRG, and Corliss King, a Chicago-based flight attendant and second vice president of TW Local 556, the Southwest Airline Flight Attendant Union. Thank you all for being with us on Chicago tonight. Corliss King, welcome back. You spoke with us last night. Teresa Murray, I'll start with you. How confident are you that the airline will actually be back to normal operation?
Well, at this point, we have to take their word for it. I do give Southwest credit for basically pausing like 2/3 of their schedule this week so they could get crews and planes back in position. And if they say they're ready tomorrow, then hopefully they are, and passengers can get where they need to be.
Corliss King, in all, it seems like there have been more than 15,000 total cancellations just in the last 5 days or so. How unprecedented a disruption is this?
It's catastrophic for us. We have seen disruptions before. We have seen situations that we felt were meltdowns that we've tried to work with management on addressing through their technology issues and quality of life issues in terms of crews getting where they needed to be. But this is definitely different. And I think it's loud enough to sound the alarm that we've been trying to sound for years, to say that we have to take it seriously and ensure that this does not happen again.
Yeah, because Teresa Murray, Southwest blamed the winter storm. They blamed a lot of staff being sick or away, but every airline had to deal with this and didn't see anywhere near this kind of disruption. So in your mind, what is the main culprit here?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, all of the airlines had some cancellations and delays last weekend. Some of it was due to weather, sure. Some of it could have been foreseen and prevented, but Southwest's issues were far more catastrophic. And it comes down to two things from what we've been able to tell. One, outdated technology, and then two, the way that Southwest operates its point-to-point system of flying out planes instead of the hub and spoke that gives other airlines more flexibility, and Southwest didn't have that.
And Corliss King, there have been some postmortems written here about this situation. One columnist said that Southwest, it began as this sort of scrappy regional type of airline, then it grew to be one of the quote-unquote big boys, but it didn't it didn't update its systems to match that. Is that the problem here, and what needs to be done going forward?
That's absolutely the problem. We have some systems that are built for 1999 flying, and we are in 2022 and 2023. And those of us on the front lines, I am a line flying flight attendant. I happen to be also the vice president of our union. And so we as flight attendants know firsthand when the plan goes awry. When it works well. And our unique brand of doing things, however, we have now grown into the largest domestic carrier, and our technology has to keep up with that growth. The people have been in place and have built this airline on the backs of our personalities and what we bring to the table and our experience for our passengers, but our technology has to work in order for us to do our job, which is to be the face of Southwest Airlines to the flying public.
We'll see if management there gets the message. Teresa Murray, Southwest has said it will reimburse passengers a reasonable amount for mixed flights, extra nights at a hotel, some food or other transportation costs. What's a reasonable amount to expect if you're a passenger?
Well, hopefully Southwest won't be stingy with that, but reasonable is a squishy term. And so I would think, though, that, I mean, if you're submitting a hotel bill for some place that was $200 a night or something, okay, that sounds reasonable. If you said that you wanted to stay on a yacht for a night and it was $2,000, then maybe that's not so reasonable. But I think with the pressure that Southwest is going to get from regulators as well as from the public, I really hope that they'll do the right thing and not nitpick with passengers who would like nothing more than to have been able to fly where they wanted to fly instead of having to stay in the hotel and buy extra food and all of that.
Especially during the holidays where many had to cancel plans seeing their families. What about all those stranded bags, Corliss King? When will they get back to passengers?
Well, that I'm not involved with because that's ground operations, but I can tell you this. All of the employees of Southwest Airlines have the same mission, which is to make our passengers experience the best we possibly can. So I do applaud management for actually opening up the throttle and making sure that they did everything they could to begin to get flight crew back where they should be. And I know that they're going to do their very best to get passengers' belongings back to them in a timely manner. I know that all of our frontline employees are all hands on deck to make that happen. And we absolutely have begun tired of saying we are sorry, but we are family. And when someone commits an inconvenience to someone that we value like our passengers, we are all going to band together to make it right. We need our management to also be committed to making it right. And I see some inroads in that in the last 24 hours, certainly, to get flight crews where they belong. And I'm sure that will apply to getting bags where they belong as well.
And certainly some of those frontline employees, customer service, having to deal with irate passengers. Teresa Marie, what accountability do you believe Southwest should face from regulators, from government, for what happened?
Well, I think that, I mean, DOT has already indicated that they're going to open an investigation and basically look into whether Southwest had any reasonable expectation that they were going to be able to make all of the flights that they had scheduled. I don't think they had a good enough contingency plan in place, but that will be for the Department of Transportation to determine. But honestly, we hope that they start asking all of the airlines to be just as accountable. Almost all the airlines had problems last weekend, but none as severe as Southwest. So we hope that the other airlines don't get away with, scot-free just because all of the focus is on Southwest. There's enough blame to go around, and all of the airlines need to be held more accountable.
And Corliss, we mentioned this earlier, Southwest built its brand on being a carrier that did things differently. It was scrappy, it was fun, it was low cost, it had good customer service. How damaged is the brand now?
I believe very firmly that Southwest Airlines has managed to have the best passengers in the business. The people who fly Southwest for a reason. Anybody can take you from point A to point B, but they're flying Southwest because of the people, the brand promise. And I think that we're going to get back to where we need to be. What is a constant is that the workers show up. The frontline employees were there, we were ready to serve, and we did the best we could with what we had to work with. I believe that once we do the proper investment in our processes, in our systems, in our technology, and we invite the frontline workers through their unions to the table to be the opportunity to identify problems on the front end, I think our passengers will be back to the experience that they expect, and we'll be back to feeling the love.
All right, we'll see if that begins tomorrow, as again, the CEO has promised a return to mostly normal operations after a very chaotic week. Teresa Marie, Corliss King, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
And up next, local musicians nominated for the Grammy Award for Best Children's Music Album, so stay with us.
Do you think there's been sort of a rethinking of how those events happened here in Chicago?
I made a promise to myself and my career that every year I would make a piece of art dedicated to the memory.
Got into a zone of mentor to children. See what we could do to.
I'm using my past to push forward, to build a movement to create the world that we all want to see.
There's much more ahead on the program, including a rundown of new laws to know in the new year. But first, 2 of the 5 Grammy nominees for Best Children's Album are from the Chicago area. For Justin Roberts, it's his 5th nomination. For the duo Wendy and DB, it's their 1st. Chicago Tonight producer Mark Vitale met them to find out more about making music for a young audience with a possible Grammy Award in the balance.
I'm an icicle. I'm an igloo.
I kind of accidentally fell into this because I was playing in a band called Pimentos for Gus in Minneapolis in the early 90s and started working at a preschool. Started writing songs for kids, but never thought I'd be a children's musician. But I had a knack for writing about kids' lives and had a lot of memories of my own childhood that seemed to come out naturally.
His 16th LP, Space Cadet, earned Justin Roberts another Grammy nomination.
This is my 5th nomination, which is crazy. Unexpected, but spent a lot of time working on this record and just super excited to see it acknowledged.
But I'm illuminated through and through, 'cause I'm not just an eye when I'm with you.
Leave your hat at the door, feel your feet on the floor.
Wendy and DB are 10 years into their musical partnership.
We've had ups and downs, just like everybody, but we've weathered the whole thing. So, and we work well together. I mean, DB and I sing. I love singing with DB, and I just love working with him. You know, fun. So I think people feel that when they come out to a live show, they can feel it. He has listened to me, and I appreciate that immensely, DB. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you listen to me when I need to do something with the arrangement. I say, no, we need to go and do this with that. I said, this will make this, you know. I said, sometimes I have to take something and say, we need to take it back. We seem to make really good decisions with each other. Yeah.
Welcome sign at the all accepted. Come explore.
Their 5th record, Into the Little Blue House, is a blues album for kids. Fellow nominee Justin Roberts connected them with the producer.
So I get Justin on the phone, and I'm like, Justin, we need somebody. We're doing this. We want to do this blues album. What do I do? And he said, you have to call Michael Freeman.
Built from the bottom, cornerstone, where love is planted, love is grown.
Veteran producer Michael Freeman enlisted top talent like Billy Branch and Ivy Ford and taught Wendy and DB a lesson. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Ask the questions. Ask the questions. You have to ask the questions.
You have to ask the questions. That's true.
I don't want to be a why, I'd rather be a we. In French, it's plain to see.
I'm excited about all 5 nominees this year. It's a great group. It's a cliche to say it's an honor to be nominated, but it is, because you know that a bunch of your peers cared enough about your record to vote for you, so I'm good with that.
All your love is me and I am you.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Good luck to all the nominees. The Grammy Awards are coming up on February 5th, and we'll be sure to let you know if Justin Roberts or Wendy and DB take home the award, or maybe they tie. Some Chicago love there. There's more about them on our website and additional performances from Justin Roberts and Wendy DB at the end of our program tonight. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, from a minimum wage hike to expanded insurance coverage, hundreds of new laws will take effect in 2023. We have a rundown of a few to know. Where we've been and what we've learned. We look back on memorable moments from our 2022 In Your Neighborhood series. And the greatest movies of all time, we talk about the latest edition of the revered Sight and Sound movie list with some local film critics. But first, some more of today's top stories. Pelé, the Brazilian king of soccer, died today at 82. Over his storied career, Pelé won record 3 World Cups. He had been undergoing treatment for colon cancer since 2021. Pelé was introduced to the soccer world at 17 during the 1958 World Cup in Sweden as the youngest player at the tournament. He went on to become a global ambassador for the sport and is widely regarded as one of the soccer's greatest players in history. New Year's Eve revelers might want to consider public transit to get around this are offering passengers free rides Saturday night. From 10 p.m. Saturday to 4 a.m. Sunday, you can skip the fare on buses and trains. And Metro will provide free travel from all trains arriving or departing from downtown stations after 6 p.m. Saturday. 2022 was a busy year for the Illinois legislature, enacting hundreds of new laws. Here are some that may have fallen under the radar or that could be helpful to know is our Amanda Vinicky. Amanda, we've already talked about the most controversial new law of the year that may or may not take effect, Safety Act. So what are the other laws that you've kept tabs on?
Yeah, Paris, there are going to be so many new laws that take effect starting Sunday, and that, of course, is the first day of 2023. As you noted, the most major of those is that Safety Act. But the change, of course, has received a lot of attention. We're going to hone in, however, on some that have not. And that doesn't, however, mean that they are not important. For example, a law that gives more flexibility to domestic violence survivors to get court protections by allowing victims to file petitions for protective orders online. And in larger counties with populations of 250,000 residents, courts must also offer remote hearings. Now, Cook County is among places that already offer this. Amanda Pyron, who is head of a 37-member coalition advocating to end gender-based violence, says that was huge for a gunshot victim who got a civil order of protection from her hospital bed.
Here she is. She survived, gun-involved domestic violence. She's nervous about being released from the hospital, going back to her home of residence. Having a civil order of protection, knowing that the offender had been told and ordered to stay away from her, was that extra layer of security that she could have before she left. And she could only get that remotely. She could not leave the hospital and go directly to the courthouse and then wait for that order to be served.
Now, also potentially important for women in particular, come January, employers will be required to offer 10 days to those who have a miscarriage.
I had a friend of mine who lost their child at 8 months. It's devastating, 8 months. And, the heartbeat just stopped and you don't know why. And I think that that's something that a person has to process, and they need time to process. You can't just go back to work and pretend like the world is the same as it was before, because it's just not.
Other laws passed this year, but which don't take effect until January 2024, will require more coverage of genetic, prostate screenings, and medically necessary breast reductions. Measures that provide public health protections, but which the head of the state's Association for Small Businesses says are hidden costs businesses are having to deal with, is they are also having to deal with inflation. Also, an increase in the statewide minimum wage. For a couple more days, anyone 18 or older must be paid at least $12 an hour. That goes up to $13 an hour in 2023, and then up by another dollar the next couple of years until it reaches $15 in 2025. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, Illinois' Chris Davis, says already he knows of very few employers that are paying the minimum wage. Most are paying more.
Employers have been bracing for it. They're aware of it. They've been expecting it. However, employers can't find employees right now. And sort of regardless of what they're paying, they're finding it very hard to hire still. 48% of small business owners are reporting difficulty in hiring still.
Another new law could help job seekers who did not go the traditional route by walking across a stage for a high school graduation. Those who pass a high school equivalency course and exam won't get a certificate. From now on, it will be recognized as a diploma.
In the past, that term equivalency certificate carried a stigma and the incorrect assumption that the graduate had received a lower level of degree. And this change accurately reflects that the high school equivalency certificate is a diploma, ensuring no graduates of Illinois high schools will face challenges based on inaccurate assessments of their educational level.
Going forward, Illinois school board members who make decisions that have huge impacts on students of all ages will need to get trauma-informed training.
It's a reflection of the world, I think, that we live in. School children are facing things that in my generation we didn't have to worry about, like mass shootings in schools, and a pandemic that has certainly had a very strong impact on school children.
Also, middle and high school students can take at least one day off from school, excused, to participate in a civic event. Now, Paris, there are many other laws worth highlighting here. You have object vehicles. They will not be liable for any speeding tickets or other citations once that car's been stolen. Also, a lower vehicle registration fee for senior citizens. And then we've got some more light-hearted laws, I guess you could describe them as. August 1st, henceforth, is going to officially be Sweet Corn Appreciation Day in Illinois. I know you've been waiting for it. Also, Illinois officially getting a state snake. That, by the way, is the Eastern milk snake, that is, and a state rock. That, by the way, is the Dalo stone.
Not to be confused with the milkshake. Amanda, thanks very much.
Clearly,
Stay right
I'm hungry,
there.
you can tell, huh?
Up next, our team shares some of their favorite stories from our In Your Neighborhood series. But first, we take a look at the weather. Every Thursday night, we venture out to talk with the people and tell the stories of local communities in our In Your Neighborhood series. In 2022, we visited 33 Chicago community areas, some more than once, plus 10 Chicago suburbs, and even ventured up north to take the pulse of Milwaukee. From a Thanksgiving water main break to a community rebuilding after an apartment explosion, we want to be there for the big news events, but beyond those kinds of stories, we really aim to highlight what's happening every day in communities across the region and shine a light on those commonalities that bind us all together as a city and as a region and help us learn from each other. And joining us to look back at Chicago tonight in Your Neighborhood 2022 are Nick Blumberg, Amanda Vinicky, WTTW News producer Acacia Hernandez, and Joanna Hernandez. Good to see all of you here. Happy New Year to all of you. Nick, you were just out in the 20 below zero temperature last week. Was that your top moment of the year?
Oh, absolutely. Nothing better. And tonight, when it's like 60 degrees, I get to be in the studio. It's perfect.
Right. No, what was your top moment? Seriously, if it wasn't that.
There were so many. I mean, truly, it sounds cliche to say there were so many moments, but one that really sticks out in my mind was in June, we were out in North Halsted for the first Pride Parade since 2019. There was a ton of excitement about the parade coming back, this big annual celebration, but there had also been in the time since the last parade a big racial reckoning in, the drag community, in Chicago's queer bars and restaurants. One of the leaders of that movement for greater equity and inclusivity was drag performer Joe Mama, who talked with us about what it was like to have the parade back after a big period of upheaval. Here's a look.
I hope I've seen so many new faces of all different colors, of all different walks of life as we've opened back up. Everyone just cannot wait to get out and about and celebrate, and I'm all for it. I mean, we've really overcome a lot, and we continue to overcome a lot, and I always believe in radical joy, and that's finding joy in dark places and in dark times, and this definitely would be one of those moments.
I love that idea of embracing joy, even when there's a lot of work still to be done in your community. There have been so many calls for, greater inclusion, for, changing the name of Boys Town to North Halsted, making sure that black and brown folks and trans folks feel welcomed in queer spaces, but, still celebrating without forgetting that there's work to do. I'm also very jealous of her eye makeup. So
over the years, we've been in North Halsted / formerly Boys Town many times over the years that we've done this. But Joanna, one of the fun things about the series is we go to neighborhoods that maybe many Chicagoans either haven't been to or they haven't heard of. What about that?
No, that was seriously one of the best things that I love the most, especially coming back and just getting to discover the city. I went to West Elsden. West Elsden is one of the smallest neighborhoods in Chicago. I didn't even know if it existed. I don't know if you guys knew about it. So it's right next to Midway Airport. And what stuck out to me the most was talking to the principal at one of the schools there. He was just so passionate about the neighborhood, and I could just tell. Just take a listen to what he had to say.
The theme of the mural is, this is the starting point, right? Education is the first step to reaching your dreams, which is why I've been here for so long, because I hope that my son gets the same thing that I'm offering these kids and the families, kind of paying it forward. I've gotten to where I am because of education.
And we were there where a very talented artist from Pilsen, his name is Pablo Serrano, he was painting that beautiful mural, and you could just tell that the principal was very dedicated and very passionate about putting this beautiful mural out there for everyone to see, especially the young kids. You know, he grew up in that area, so he was just very inspirational, wanted to just put that forward out there for all those kids who are there. This is why I love in your neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
You get to just be there and you get the sense of a community. You get to just feel that, and I don't know, I always go, when I'm done with In Your Neighborhood, I always end up feeling great, and especially when I talk with our producer here at Kazia, we always have so many stories to share.
I did too. When I did this every day back during COVID, I would come home feeling such pride in the city of Chicago, meeting these incredible people that really make this city what it is. And Amanda, one of the things we all love about Chicago is how diverse to Ukrainian village right around the time that Russia invaded Ukraine. What do you remember about
Yeah, so this
that?
was just before then, Paris, and folks were, of course, feeling scared at that point already. There was sadness, but you just used the word, and I think the overwhelming sense was one of pride. Let's meet one of these residents.
What happens if our water supply is cut off? What happens if the gas is gone? What happens if we have no more electricity? How do we sustain the population? How do people continue to thrive every single day?
And that actually was a woman who I also met her mother, who's part of the Ukrainian museum there. And I mean, these are folks who love their heritage. They love Ukraine, go back there, visit, are frightened for their relatives, and continue to be. And it's one of the interesting aspects, I think, of In Your Neighborhood is not just the day that we are there. It is forging relationships and connections because, of course, we're continuing to watch what is happening in Ukraine with Russia and the impact that it has as you're seeing folks move to Chicago from Ukraine. They're still scared, they're still angry, and they are still very much filled with pride.
Still a place we might visit in 2023 then,
I imagine
given
so.
the news. Acacia Hernandez, our viewers might not be as familiar with you, but your name was said every week on this because you're the producer for the majority of our In Your Neighborhood segments.
Yay.
You do the research. You've done a great job. You do a lot of the legwork in advance to set all these things up. So what stood out to you this year?
For me, I would say it would have to be Roseland. You know, it was once known as the jewel of the South Side, and when we got there, you know, there were a lot of shut down businesses, and some of that was fallout from looting and racial reckoning from years before. But yeah, it was just seeing the disinvestment that was there, but people working to rebuild their community because they really cared about it. And one of the organizations we spoke with was Chicago Cred. Take a listen to what he had to say.
It's not a lot of people to express yourselves to. Like, a lot of these individuals is holding everything that they've ever dealt with in their lifetime within themselves. And, you know, trauma don't stay within you. You know, I may be having a bad day and I don't let nobody know it. Somebody come step on my shoe, but my boiling point was at the tip. You just stepped on my shoe, it was harmless. But I've been holding this rage in from something that happened last week, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, and then it just erupted.
Right, so that was Chicago Cred. They do face-to-face outreach out in the community in Roseland, and you know, it's taken a toll on their community, but they really get to see and hear and work with the people who live there and try to, yeah, address violence on the ground.
This is a commonality we saw in a lot of places we visited. I remember I went to Harvey earlier this year, south suburb. It's been hit hard over the last several decades, but everywhere we go, we tend to find these residents that just love living there. They love their community. They're not leaving. You know, they're not down and out about it at all.
I mean, they're dedicated to want to create change. You know, one thing I think that we all experience and we've talked about is that, yes, many of these neighborhoods experience violence, but beyond that, they want people to know, hey, this is our community. This is what we love about it. These are the beautiful things about it. And that's what also always kept me inspired.
Nick, you went to Englewood, and we visited Englewood a few times in the In Your Neighborhood series. We know that neighborhood has its challenges, so what else did you find when you were there?
Well, I mean, it fits in with exactly what we were saying. You know, doing this series, we get to see all the different issues that communities around the city face, but the folks who truly love where they live and aren't going anywhere and are dedicated to making positive changes. We did a segment where we visited a community plaza that they'd created, and they're in the process of turning a disused rail line into a nature trail. And we talked with Tanya Ward, who is the cultural steward there, about the importance of this being truly a community-driven project.
We hear what they need, we hear what they want, and we want to create something
so that they can stay in the community and not have to leave to enjoy the beauty of the city. We don't have to wait for someone else to come along to, you know, beautify us. We're going to do it ourselves.
I love the neighborhood-driven aspect of this. I also think it's really cool to see how the fabric of the city, like the built environment, changes and adapts to the needs of the people who live there. We get to see that on the ground every week.
You know, another thing we see on the ground every week, Amanda, is the community in the aftermath of some really big news event. Like, we like to go places where some big news event occurred to kind of get the temperature. So you went to Garfield Park right after that terrible mass shooting happened. What do you remember about that report?
Well, I mean, of course, that was horrific. You had a mass shooting on Halloween night, and this was relatives who were mourning a loss of a family member unrelated to violence and then became victims of violence themselves. And you go, and again, I think we're talking about both making change and also preserving legacies of some of these communities. And yet there is frustration. There is speak with leaders of a community that say, we don't have enough attention here, and there are residents who both celebrate all the wonderful places that we discover. I mean, in your neighborhood, there are a lot of times I'm like, all right, I'm ready to move here. I love this restaurant. Thank you to all the business owners. It's amazing.
We always find new restaurants.
Thank you to everybody for that. And at the same time, you also go to places. Unfortunately, there are some areas where there aren't a lot of places to go to, and you really visibly see that sort of disinvestment. So we did speak again with one of the pastors who's trying to really be there for his community. Let's meet him.
This has been a mishap, not just with the mass shooting, but this has been taking place on a regular. Unfortunately, because of the mass shooting, now the comparison from East Garfield to Highland Park is now being brought up as it was the same resources. But to be honest with you, we've been lacking before the mass shooting.
And by the way, I've continued to follow that and even met one of the victims from that shooting afterward who's advocating for change when it comes to statewide policy. Now, by the way, Acacia was not the only producer. She's the main one, but not the only one working behind the scenes here. Also wanting to give a shout out to producers Marissa Nelson and Blair Paddock.
And a big thank you to our photogs, Alonzo Stallings, Michael Cox, Felix Mendez, Grant Banks.
And we can't forget about Tim Boyd, Damon Ranger, Lawrence Dennis, and Dan Morris. We couldn't do this without them, honestly. They were out there with us the whole entire time.
It's a community of people here to tell the stories of all of these communities. All right, well, great work to all of you this year. Look forward to more in 2023.
Thanks. Awesome.
And up next, a look at some of the greatest films of all time. See if you agree right after this. Here's a fun dinner table debate. The greatest movies of all time. Every 10 years, Sight and Sound magazine comes out with its master list of the 100 greatest films ever made. There are a lot of pictures on there you might expect. The Godfather, Citizen Kane, Vertigo, and many more you might not, including the #1 pick this year, and we'll get to that in a second. The list is a compilation of submissions from movie critics across the globe. And joining us are two Chicago-based freelance film critics who are part of this year's process, Robert Daniels and Mariah Gates. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. First, Robert Daniels, tell us why this list is.
Yeah, so the first Sight and Sound list actually began in 1962. Sight and Sound is a British magazine, and basically what they did was they polled a small group of critics, about 50 or so, and from their votes and the tabulation of those votes, spat out about 100 of the greatest films of all time. And now they do this vote every decade, And so every decade people pull out the Sight and Sound and they use it as their guide to get into filmmaking or to get into film history itself.
So Mariah Gates, we mentioned both of you were part of the process issuing your submissions. How many critics are involved in total?
This year it was the largest. It was a little over 1,600, and I think starting in the previous decade, they added curators, film festival programmers, historians, and other academics as well. So it's a much broader, the 1,600 is a mixture of different people who work in film, who work with film history, who really have a broader perspective on not just British and American films, but global film history as well.
So this is definitely the list to end all lists, and so let's get to the countdown of the top 5. So coming in at number 5 on the Sight and Sound 2022 Greatest Movies of All Time list, Mood for Love, and then 4, Tokyo Story, 3, Citizen Kane, which probably was #1 for many of the lists over the years, Vertigo, Alfred Hitchcock, and then #1, a movie called Jean Diomande, 23, Quai de Commerce, 1080 Brussels. I feel like an idiot for never having heard of this film, but tell us, Mariah, about this film and why it landed at #1.
It's a landmark of feminist cinema, partially inspired by the life of the director's mother, Chantal Akerman. She was actually the same age as Orson Welles when she made this film. So if you're thinking about like wonderkind filmmakers, she's sort of the female Orson Welles, you can think of it that way. But she specifically wanted to make a film that showed that her mother's life mattered, that women who are homemakers, their lives matter, that these emotional ups and downs of their everyday life are just as, poignant as, Charles Foster Kane and Rosebud. It's the same kind of journey. It's a 3.5-hour movie. It was the first film directed by a woman to make the list. It first made the list, I believe, in 2002. Kind of,
even though it had been made in 1975.
1975, it took that long, and then it sort of slowly lists. And I do think that part of the reason they opened the aperture, doubled the amount of people who had submissions, was because they knew there was big oversights in both films directed by women, films by people of color, LGBTQ films. Chantal Akerman was a lesbian. This film is not necessarily a queer film, but she is a queer filmmaker. And I think it shows that they realized they had this gap. They fixed the issue, and a film that is as good as anything you've ever seen finally rose to the top.
As good as Citizen Kane or Vertigo, which had that #1 position. So, Robert Gates, were you surprised? Robert Daniels, I'm sorry, were you surprised at this #1 selection?
I was surprised, yeah. I mean, I think mostly because the list has been fairly consistent, for about 4 decades. Citizen Kane reigned atop, and Vertigo took the #1 spot on the last list. But if you had looked at the top 10 over almost the entire history of the Sight and Sound polling, it basically remained unchanged. And for this particular iteration, almost half of them changed in the top 10. And then we had a completely new #1 that had never been in the top 10 before. So, it definitely surprised me, and it surprised many others.
A big sea change. So, Robert, what are some films that you submitted in your top 10 that didn't make this final list?
Oh, I think the primary one is probably Cheryl Dunye's The Watermelon Woman. It is a complex story of a queer director, lesbian director, who is looking to the past and finds a movie figure who is a lesbian black woman who was a director that no one knows about, and she decides to make a documentary about her. And through making a documentary about her, she reveals portions of her own identity. And I think it's a complex view into black lesbian identity. It also was I believe, the first film directed by a black lesbian.
And Mariah Gates, any films that you submitted that were surprising omissions from the final list?
Yeah, there was one film that I had on my list because I love films directed by women, and I love the silent era, and there were lots of women who made films very early in cinema that are often neglected and forgotten. And I saw a film about 10 years ago called Shoes from director Lois Weber, who, along with D.W. Griffith, actually invented a lot of the techniques that we take for granted today. Not in Shoes, in another one of her films, but she specifically saw cinema as a medium in which to tell moral stories. And obviously there's still debate, like, should it be just entertaining? Should you learn a lesson? She felt that cinema was going to be the biggest medium. More people were going to see her films than would ever read the book it was based on. So she wanted to make films that helped people live a moral life. So Shoes is about a woman who works at a department store, and she needs a new pair of shoes, but she's supporting her entire family. Her father is a drunkard, takes all her money, and she contemplates, I don't want to spoil the film from 1916, but she contemplates spending some time with a gentleman in order to earn money for a new pair of shoes so she can keep supporting her family.
I see. All right, so an early film there that kind of set a precedent for later films. Robert, what do you say to folks that say, like, this doesn't really matter, there's politics involved, it's all subjective?
Yeah.
What about that?
Well, I think every movie is, how you feel about every movie is subjective in some way. We all approach movie and filmmaking and cinema with our own personal emotions. And I think everything in cinema and everything in art is inherently political. But I guess when we talk about why does it matter, once again, I think the Sight and Sound poll is used to create a canon and how we want people to see film, how we want people to see the experiences of others is reflected in this poll. And so when someone who is in their freshman year of college says, I want to find out the best films that's ever been made, they look at this list, and from there they develop not just politics, they develop empathy, they develop awareness of the world around them.
And Roger Ebert made that point a lot, that was the whole purpose of filmmaking and art in general. All right, I have a lot of homework to do. I can't wait to watch some of these. Robert Daniels, Mariah Gates, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this mild Thursday night. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for The Year in Review. We might even bust out some champagne. And now for all of us here, thanks for watching and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.